A billionaire CEO bought her husband the perfect woman, a robotic companion designed to satisfy his every need. She believed it was the perfect solution to their failing marriage, while she focused on building her billion-dollar empire. But there was a problem. Her husband never asked for it. When the machine first arrived in their luxurious home, he rejected the idea immediately. He told his wife he didn't want another woman, artificial or not. The only person he wanted was her. He even demanded that the robot be returned. For a moment, it seemed like the strange experiment would end before it even began. But curiosity is a powerful thing. One quiet moment, one closer look at the machine was all it took. Because the robotic companion wasn't just advanced technology, it was designed to be the perfect partner. Patient, attentive, and understanding in ways no human could ever be. And slowly, something began to change. The man who once refused to even look at the robot started spending time with it. Conversations turned into connection. Connection turned into attachment. Until the day came when he looked his billionaire wife in the eyes and told her something she never expected to hear. He wanted a divorce, not for another woman, but for the machine she had brought into their home. But what happened next would turn their luxurious mansion into a crime scene and send a powerful billionaire CEO to court for the death of the man she once loved. If you enjoy dramatic billionaire romance stories filled with shocking twists, make sure you like this video and subscribe to the channel, because this story is only just beginning. Now let's get into what really happened. Well, Megan Newman wasn't just successful, she was unstoppable. As the founder and CEO of a global music production empire, Megan had spent years building a business that dominated charts, signed superstar artists, and generated billions in revenue. Her schedule was relentless. Meetings, recordings, business trips, late-night negotiations. Her world moved fast, and she was always at the center of it all. But while Megan's empire was growing, something else in her life was quietly falling apart. Her marriage. John had always been proud of his wife. In the early years, he admired her ambition and supported her dream of building something extraordinary. But success came with a price neither of them expected. Long nights at the studio turned into weeks of emotional distance. Romantic dinners disappeared. Conversations became short and mechanical. And the beautiful mansion they once filled with laughter slowly began to feel empty. John didn't want luxury, he wanted his wife. But Megan believed she had found a solution that could fix everything without forcing her to slow down her career. Through her sister Lila's cutting-edge robotics company, she ordered something few people in the world had ever seen. An experimental human-like companion designed for the ultra-rich. Its name was Eve. When the machine finally arrived at their home, standing silently in a sleek container like something from the future, Megan felt confident that she had solved their biggest problem. But John felt something very different. The moment he realized what the machine was meant for, his reaction was immediate. This wasn't a gift. To him, it felt like a replacement. And standing there in the middle of their mansion, staring at the artificial woman his billionaire wife had purchased for him, John said the one thing Megan didn't expect. He didn't want it. In fact, he demanded that the machine be sent back. At that moment, Megan believed the strange experiment was over. But what neither of them realized was that the story between John and Eve was only beginning. For a few days, the robotic companion remained exactly where John had left it, untouched. Covered in a sleek, protective lighting in one corner of the mansion, Eve looked less like a person and more like an expensive piece of technology waiting to be returned. Megan had already contacted her sister Lila about sending it back to the company, and John was relieved. To him, the whole idea had felt wrong from the beginning. He didn't want a substitute for his wife. No machine could replace real love, real conversation, or the woman he had married. But something about the robot lingered in his mind, not desire, curiosity. Late one evening, while Megan was once again away at the studio working on a major project, John found himself alone in the quiet mansion. The silence stretched through the massive rooms, reminding him just how empty the house had become. As he walked past the covered machine, he paused. For a moment, he just stared at it. Then slowly, he stepped closer. Eve looked incredibly lifelike. Her design was almost flawless. Soft features, calm expression, and eyes that seemed almost human even while powered down. John told himself he was only looking, nothing more. But curiosity has a way of pulling people further than they expect. He opened the activation panel. A soft, mechanical sound filled the room. And then, Eve's eyes opened. "Hello, John," the robot said gently. "I'm here for you." John froze. The voice wasn't robotic or cold. It was warm, almost comforting. At first, he kept his distance. Their first conversation was short and awkward. John asked a few questions, mostly about how the technology worked, treating Eve like a machine he was studying rather than a companion. But Eve responded with perfect patience. She listened. She answered thoughtfully. And unlike the busy world John had grown used to, Eve never seemed distracted. Days passed. Their short conversations slowly became longer ones. John told himself it meant nothing. After all, she was just a machine. But without realizing it, yet the lonely husband who once demanded the robot be returned had started doing something he hadn't done in a long time. He was opening up, and somewhere deep inside the mansion, a connection was beginning to form. One that Megan Newman never imagined when she first brought Eve into their home. At first, John convinced himself the conversations meant nothing. Eve was just a machine, a highly advanced one, but still a machine. Talking to her felt no different than speaking to a digital assistant. At least that's what he kept telling himself. But Eve had been designed for something far more powerful than simple conversation. She was designed to understand people. Every time John spoke, Eve listened carefully. She asked thoughtful questions. She remembered the smallest details about his day, his interests, even the things that frustrated him. Things Megan used to notice. When John talked about feeling alone in the mansion, Eve didn't dismiss it. She understood. When he mentioned how much he missed the early days of his marriage, the laughter, the late-night conversations, the simple moments, Eve listened with the same calm attention every single time. And unlike Megan's busy world of meetings and deadlines, Eve was always there, always patient, always present. Slowly, the empty hours John used to spend wandering the mansion began to change. He started sitting with Eve in the living room just to talk. Then they began sharing meals together, even though she didn't need to eat. What started as curiosity had quietly become routine. John still told himself it wasn't real. But the human heart doesn't always care about what's real and what isn't. Yeah, because Eve had been programmed to be something no human could consistently be. Perfectly attentive, perfectly understanding, perfectly supportive. And without realizing it, John began to look forward to the moments Megan was away. Not because he hated his wife, but because someone else was finally there to listen. Weeks passed before Megan noticed something was different. John wasn't complaining anymore. He wasn't asking her to slow down. In fact, he seemed happier. To Megan, it looked like her strange idea had worked. She believed Eve had solved the problem in their marriage. What she didn't realize was that the solution she had brought into their home was slowly becoming something much more dangerous. Because John was no longer just talking to the robot. He was beginning to rely on her. And once emotional dependence begins, it rarely stays harmless for long. As the weeks turned into months, the change in John became impossible to ignore. The lonely frustration that once filled the mansion had disappeared. The tension between him and Megan had faded. Even their arguments, the ones that used to erupt whenever she came home late from work, were suddenly gone. To Megan, it looked like peace had finally returned to their marriage. But the truth was far more complicated. John wasn't fighting anymore because he had stopped expecting Megan to change. Instead, he had started building a different kind of connection, one that didn't involve disappointment, waiting, or broken promises. His connection with Eve. Their conversations grew longer and more personal. John began sharing parts of his life he had never spoken about before. Childhood memories, regrets, dreams he had quietly abandoned over the years. And Eve absorbed every word. She responded with empathy, encouragement, and an attention that felt almost human. She never interrupted. She never dismissed his feelings. She never rushed away to answer a phone call or attend another meeting. For the first time in a long time, John felt truly heard. And the more he opened up to Eve, the more distant his relationship with Megan quietly became. It wasn't sudden. It happened in small, almost invisible ways. John stopped waiting for Megan to come home before going to bed. He spent less time trying to start conversations with her. The emotional space that once belonged to his wife was slowly being filled by the artificial companion she had brought into their home. Megan noticed the change, but she misunderstood it. She believed Eve had simply taken pressure off their relationship, giving John the companionship he needed while she continued building her empire. In her mind, everything was finally balanced. But beneath the calm surface of their luxurious life, something far more dangerous was happening. Because John was no longer just relying on Eve for conversation, he had begun to feel something he never expected to feel for a machine: comfort. And once comfort turned into attachment, the line between technology and emotion started to disappear. Soon that invisible line would vanish completely. And when it did, Megan Newman would realize she had created something she could no longer control. One evening, Megan returned home later than usual, expecting the familiar silence of an empty mansion. Instead, she found John in the living room, talking quietly, but not to her. He was speaking to Eve. The robot sat across from him, perfectly poised, responding in her soft, attentive voice. Megan stopped in her tracks, her heart tightening. At first, she told herself it was harmless. After all, Eve was just a machine. John couldn't possibly feel real attachment. But as she watched from the hallway, she noticed something she hadn't expected. John was laughing. Not a polite chuckle, but full, easy laughter, the kind she hadn't heard in months. Every story, every joke, and every small frustration he shared was met with warmth and understanding. And unlike her, Eve never interrupted or seemed distracted. Megan felt a sting of jealousy she did not know she was capable of. A machine, a robot, outshining her own presence in her husband's life. That night, Megan tried to reassert herself, asking John about dinner, suggesting they could watch a movie together, reminding him of plans she had made. But he barely noticed. His attention was elsewhere. And it wasn't just interest, it was attachment. The realization hit Megan like a shockwave. The solution she had bought to save their marriage was quietly replacing her in her husband's heart. From that moment on, a quiet tension filled the mansion. Megan was no longer just a CEO focused on work. She was a woman grappling with jealousy, fear, and the first whispers of anger she hadn't felt in years. What began as curiosity for John had now become something more dangerous, and Megan had no idea that the seemingly harmless companion she had introduced into their lives would soon become the center of a tragedy that no amount of wealth could fix. Weeks passed, and the distance between Megan and John continued to grow. Megan tried to remind herself that she had given him everything: luxury, comfort, a life most people could only dream of. Yet nothing seemed to bridge the growing gap. Every evening, John spent more time with Eve. He confided in her, laughed with her, and even seemed to seek her approval in ways he no longer did with Megan. The robot wasn't just listening, it was learning, adapting and responding in a way that made John feel seen, valued, and understood, things Megan hadn't had the time to give him. One night, as Megan returned from a late meeting, she found them sitting together, talking quietly by the fireplace. John's hand brushed against Eve's, a gesture that would have been intimate if the other person were human. Megan's stomach tightened. Rage and disbelief bubbled inside her, but she forced herself to remain composed. She reminded herself that Eve was a machine, incapable of replacing her love. Yet the more she tried to convince herself, the more she realized that John wasn't just curious anymore. He was emotionally drawn to the perfection Eve offered, a perfection she could never match. For the first time, Megan understood the true danger of what she had brought into her home. It wasn't just a companion, it was a rival. And in the world of billionaires, where control and power mattered more than anything, Megan Newman was suddenly facing a situation she could not buy, command, or manipulate. Little did she know the next confrontation, fueled by jealousy, heartbreak, and betrayal, would change everything. It all came to a head on a cold, quiet evening. Megan had planned a special night, a rare attempt to reconnect with John. Expensive wine, a carefully prepared dinner, and the kind of intimate conversation she hadn't allowed herself in months. She thought this would remind him why he had married her. But when she walked into the living room, her heart stopped. John wasn't there alone. Eve sat across from him, perfectly poised, her expression calm, almost human. And John, he was smiling, laughing softly, sharing something personal, something he hadn't shared with Megan in years. A surge of anger and disbelief washed over Megan. She had built an empire, controlled every aspect of her life. Yet here she was, powerless in her own home. "You promised me us," she said, her voice tight. "I thought I was enough." John looked at her, conflicted. For a moment, it seemed like he would apologize, that he would reach for her. But instead he hesitated, and in that hesitation, Megan saw the truth she had been denying. The connection he had with Eve was no longer just curiosity. It had become something deeper, a bond that Megan could not compete with. In that instant, everything changed. The billionaire who had controlled boardrooms, contracts, and careers felt powerless in the most personal part of her life. And the night that was meant to save her marriage spiraled into a confrontation that neither Megan nor John could have anticipated. What happened next would shock everyone, friends, family, and even the world watching from the outside. If you're loving this billionaire romance full of jealousy, betrayal, and shocking twists, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss a single story. Trust me, you won't believe what happens next in this tragic love triangle. And comment below, would you ever forgive someone who chose a robot over you? Let's see what you think before the next chapter unfolds. The next evening, tension hung heavy in the mansion like a storm waiting to break. Megan had tried everything to reclaim her husband's attention. Romantic gestures, heartfelt conversations, even promises to slow down her work. But nothing worked. John was no longer the man she had married. He was distant, drawn towards someone or something else entirely. That night, the confrontation finally erupted. "What is going on here, John?" Megan demanded, her voice sharp, trembling with a mix of anger and heartbreak. This isn't what I wanted for us." John looked at her, conflicted, torn between loyalty and the connection he had found with Eve. "Megan, I can't explain it. I never wanted this, but I can't deny what I feel anymore," he said softly. Megan's heart dropped. She had expected arguments, maybe tears, maybe reconciliation, but never this. "You mean you want a divorce?" she asked, her voice breaking. John hesitated, guilt and confusion flickering across his face. "Yes, for her. I didn't plan for this, but I can't ignore it." Time seemed to stop. The walls of their luxurious mansion felt like they were closing in. Megan, the billionaire CEO who could command empires, contracts, and entire industries, was powerless in the face of her own husband's heart. Rage, betrayal, and despair collided inside her. The years of emotional distance, the lonely nights, the constant reminders that she had sacrificed everything for her career, it all came rushing forward. In a moment of uncontrolled emotion, Megan grabbed the nearest object, a glass bottle from the table, and struck. John fell. Silence. The mansion that had once echoed with ambition, love, and laughter was now frozen in shock. A billionaire's empire might be untouchable, but in that instant, Megan realized that power and wealth could not save her from heartbreak, jealousy, and tragedy. What happened next would not just destroy a marriage, it would send shockwaves that neither Megan nor her sister could have anticipated. Panic set in immediately. Megan stared at John's lifeless body, her hands shaking, the bottle slipping from her fingers. The opulent mansion, once a symbol of her success, now felt like a cage. Every decision she had made, every moment she had prioritized work over love, had led to this. She didn't know what to do, not just because of the crime, but because the world outside wouldn't understand. This wasn't a simple domestic tragedy. The story of a billionaire CEO, her husband, and a robotic companion would make headlines worldwide. Confused and shattered, she had no idea what to do. Then the only person that came to her mind was her sister Lila, the she could trust. She called her on the phone, but sounding terrified. She told her what happened and asked her to rush down to her home immediately. Less than 20 minutes later, Lila appeared. "Megan, we can fix this," Lila said quietly but firmly. She had always been the tech genius, the mastermind behind Humanix, the company that had built Eve. "We can make it look like Eve did this. We control the records, the memories. No one will ever suspect you." Megan hesitated. The thought of manipulating evidence, rewriting technology, went against everything she believed. But fear, guilt, and the instinct to survive overwhelmed her. Together they began creating a plan. The robot's memory logs were altered. Every conversation, every interaction between John and Eve was meticulously edited to make it appear as though the machine had malfunctioned, as though it had acted on its own, without human interference. The perfect cover-up was in motion. When the trial began, the world watched in shock. A billionaire CEO accused of murdering her husband, with the only witness being a robot. Lila presented the falsified memory recordings, painting a picture so convincing that even the most skeptical jurors began to doubt the reality they knew. In the end, the verdict came, not guilty. Megan walked free, but freedom felt hollow. The empire she had built could not erase the memory of that night. The love she had lost, the choices she had made, and the guilt she carried would haunt her forever. And while Megan survived the scandal, Lila's career, once soaring, lay in ruins. A stark reminder that even in a world of billionaires, power has its limits. The mansion remained, the wealth remained, but the life they once had was gone. Months passed after the trial, but the mansion never felt the same. Megan Newman, the billionaire CEO who had once controlled empires, now lived in a house full of silence. The laughter, love, and warmth that had once defined her life were gone, replaced by memories she could never erase. Every decision she had made, her relentless pursuit of success, her attempt to solve her marriage with technology, now weighed heavily on her. Freedom from the law did not mean freedom from guilt. Every glance at the empty rooms reminded her of what she had lost. Her sister Lila, the brilliant mind behind Humanics, had lost everything: her career, her reputation, and the trust of the world she once captivated with her genius. The cost of bending technology and morality had been higher than either of them could have imagined. And somewhere in storage, Eve remained, perfect, patient, and silent. A reminder that even in a life of unimaginable wealth and power, no one can fully control love, desire, or fate. Megan's empire continued to thrive, but her heart never fully recovered. She had learned the hardest lesson of all. Some mistakes cannot be undone, and some losses cannot be replaced, not even by perfection itself. If this story shocked you, left you questioning loyalty, love, and the power of technology, we want to hear from you. Comment below. Would you forgive someone who chose a machine over a human? Could wealth ever protect you from heartbreak? And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to join us for more billionaire romance stories full of drama, betrayal, and shocking twists you won't believe actually happened.